I don't know what was in the air in July, but I was a reading machine. I did not stop reading. I had a fantastic month and I read a lot. So let's just get right into it with some stats. So in July, I read a total of 12 books, DNF'd, I think 5, 2 that I tracked, and I vaguely remember 3 other ones. So there may have been more though, who knows. So yeah, 12 books finished, which was a total of 4,605 pages, making this month my second best reading month of the entire year. And I had a total of 49 hours of audiobooks, mostly read in tandem with ebooks or physical books, which I actually have a good stack of physical books this month, mostly library books, but a couple of my own. Look at that. So the books that I DNF'd. The first one was The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields, I think it was. I just really wasn't feeling it. I gave this one, I think about 80 pages it was roughly. And yeah, I just really didn't care. Like I liked the main character, didn't care about anybody else at all. The writing was just kind of okay, didn't really care for the magic. Like most of it was just kind of not that interesting to me, and I don't feel the need to continue reading books that are only like mildly interesting. I don't think that it was a bad book by any means. I have read better and there are more interesting things on my TBR. So DNF'd. I also DNF'd Late Bloomer. No clue who the author is. Yeah, this one is a contemporary romance. This one I DNF'd maybe for personal reasons because the main character is a people pleaser and maybe I didn't want to read a character who has my biggest flaw, and whatever. It felt too much like being called out for my own bullshit. Because I was reading the first little bit of that book. Again, I did not get very far into this one, and just like getting immediately annoyed with this character for like letting people walk all over her and then being like, okay, but I do that. Like, could not. So yeah, that one was just kind of a me problem. Again, I'm sure it's a great book. I just didn't want to feel like I was going to therapy while I was reading a book. So DNF for me. I hope y'all enjoy it though. I also DNF'd The Weavers of Alameda, unfortunately. It's the sequel to The Daughters of Izdahar, which I loved when I read it earlier this year, but the sequel just was not hitting for me. Again, I got about 80 pages in, roughly. Yeah, I got 80 pages into it, and I was not caring at all. Like literally zero intrigue whatsoever. So sadly a DNF. And then the other ones, what were they? Yeah, I didn't get far into the other two like at all. Reverie by Lasala. Didn't realize that it was a contemporary YA fantasy or sci-fi, whatever it was, but I didn't even get far enough to find out if it was sci-fi or fantasy. Yeah, I was just like immediately not enjoying the main character's teenager problems. I didn't care about it, so DNF'd. And then with Victories Greater Than Death, maybe I'll try this one again over like ebook or physical book, but I picked up the audiobook. Sorry to be mean, but the narrator's voice is incredibly annoying. It was very like squeaky and like it was a lot, and I was just like, I'm not listening to your voice for like 4 hours. So that was a DNF there. So yeah, those are the DNFs. Again, I think there were a couple other ones. I DNF a lot, if you haven't noticed. I am a unapologetic DNFer, and I will do so the moment that I'm not entertained. But yeah, I think there were a couple other ones, but I can't remember what they are now. I'm really bad at tracking my DNFs. I should really try and get better at that. But either way. So the actual books that I read this month were plentiful. So, the first one was Middlegame by Seanan McGuire. This one was a carryover from July, and I loved this book. I have absolutely no idea how to explain what it's about, aside from the fact that it's about these twins who were made in a lab by an alchemist. And shit happens. Like, it was such a weird, wacky book, and I adored it. It was a weird one, and I mean that in the best way possible. This was fantastic. I have no idea how she wrote this book. Like, how does your mind work like this? I gave it 4.5 stars. It was phenomenal, and I can't wait to get to the sequels. Then I read The Spellshop. I think the author is Beth Durst. I'm pretty sure that was this one. I'm not 100% sure though. This one I read with the Cozy Quill book club over on Fable and I adored it. It was so cute. It's a cozy fantasy romance about a woman who grew up on this very small island until her parents wanted to move to the big city. And the book starts when she's an adult, her parents have passed away, and she is a librarian at the Royal Library, I think it was, and there are revolutionaries trying to take down the government, and they're doing so by burning the city, but especially burning the library because they're protesting the act of hoarding knowledge, and knowledge only being for the rich and for the elite. But because the main character loves books so much, she just grabs as many books as she can and gets in a boat, and the only place that she could think to go is back to her home island, and she goes with her best friend who is a sentient spider plant. And yeah, when she gets to the island, she learns that the island is dying. There are these magical storms that are destroying things, the trees are all dying, the mermaids are not able to reproduce, a whole bunch of things are happening, and while doing magic without a license is illegal, she does have a whole bunch of spell books that nobody knows about, so she might as well use them to try and help the island. So she sets up a jam shop to cover up the fact that she's also selling spell work. This was such a cute book. I really enjoyed this one. The romance was fantastic. I loved the friendship element. The best part of this book was the beautiful community of the townspeople and how they're all there for each other, and just through thick or thin, they're ride or die, even for their newcomers. It was just so beautiful. I love a good found family element. It's my favorite thing in a book, and this book was such a good example of that beautiful found family, and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I read a novel love story by Ashley Poston. I adore this author. She's definitely become one of my favorite authors. This one was not my favorite book by her. I did like it though, but I also didn't. I liked the end a lot. So the synopsis of this one is basically about a woman who, I think 6 years before the start of the book, her fiance broke it off with her, and ever since then she's just been floating through life, has no idea who she is. She feels very lost and just untethered from her own self. But she and her best friend are part of a spicy romance book club, and every year they all go to a cabin in the woods together and just hang out and read books together and have a good time. But this year everybody else had to cancel, so it's just her going by herself. And as she's driving there, she gets caught in a massive storm and her car breaks down, and she just kind of pulls into the nearest town that she can find. But when she wakes up in the morning, she realizes that she's actually in the fictional town of her favorite book series. She has no idea how she got there, but she's not mad about it because she would rather be there than to face her life, basically. Yeah, this was kind of a weird one. There were things that I liked about it and things that I didn't. It was a pretty bland main character. She had very little personality to her. But that was also the point of it. The whole point of her character was that she was lost and she had no clue who she was. So it makes sense for the reader to also have no idea who she is and to gradually learn as she learns about herself. I appreciate what the author was going for with that, but it just didn't really work for me. She was a pretty boring main character. So I also found the pacing to be off. She was only in the town for really a couple of days, and that was not enough time for me for this romance to be blooming the way that it did because of how the two of them met. They were not nice to each other when they first met. They both said and did things that were pretty horrendous and kind of apologized, but not really. And there wasn't enough time to go from that level of hatred into being madly in love. If she'd been there for even a couple of weeks, it would have been okay, but it was over the span of a few days, and that felt really weird to me. So I liked the romance, but I didn't buy into the timeline of it, and it kept throwing me off. And I realized that oh yeah, it's only been 3 days. It's a weekend. But the ending was fantastic. I loved where things went and kind of the course of the plot with the ending. I thought it was a very unique way to end a romance book. Didn't really see it coming, and I thoroughly enjoyed that part of it. So the ending bumped it up to a 3.5 star. After that, I read Race to the Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This one is a middle grade fantasy that is largely about Navajo myths. It's about these two siblings who the one the main character is able to see monsters, and her dad's new boss is a monster and actually kidnaps her father and is I think trying to use the kids' powers. I kind of forget the details, I'm not gonna lie. This was not a very standout book for me. I did like the myth element to it and getting to learn about some Navajo myths. That was great. But as a actual book, I wasn't a huge fan of it. I think the issue is that I like middle grade in my head. It sounds great until I actually go to read it, and then I'm oh yeah, I actually don't like kids and find them to be really annoying. So for me, reading about 12-year-olds was not great. I think I need to part ways with middle grade. So for me, this book was a 3.5. Next up was The Emperor and the Endless Palace by Justinian Huang. This one is a beautiful book. It's kind of a romance, but not really. It's a reincarnation story that spans centuries. It starts in, what was it, 4 BCE and then to 1740 and then to modern day. And it follows these two characters who keep finding each other in different lives and falling in love, and their story is just kind of cursed to end terribly, basically. This was so beautiful. I loved the ways that all three timelines were interwoven and they mirrored each other in a bunch of like really interesting ways. Some more obvious, some a bit more subtle. Like all three timelines would have symbolism of like peaches and jade and just like little hints of similarities throughout them. And then the stories were all the same in all three timelines, but they were done in a way where it made sense to their time period. And yeah, this was just such a beautifully interwoven story. I really enjoyed it. It was gorgeously done. The characters were interesting. It was a compelling plot line. Everything about this was so good. I did lose interest towards the end of it, just like lower intrigue towards the end because I could kind of see where things were going. But overall, this was a fantastic book and I definitely recommend it. And I gave it a 4-star. And then I read Denison Avenue by Christina Wong. This is also a very beautiful book, just like physically stunning. I love the illustrations here, and the illustrations of Toronto in the back of the book are just gorgeous. So physically beautiful book. And the contents were also beautiful as well. This one is about an elderly Chinese Canadian woman who very suddenly loses her husband, and it's just a story about her processing grief by going around her neighborhood in Toronto and just collecting cans and trying to keep busy just to keep the grief at bay, basically. This was very heartbreaking and it's not my normal genre. I'm not usually a literary fiction kind of person, but I love books about Toronto, and especially this one. She lives in Kensington Market in Chinatown, which is my favorite place in Toronto. It's beautiful. And this book is largely about her noticing how it's being gentrified, which is actually happening. The city has been trying to destroy that area for years, and the people who live there are fighting tooth and nail to stop it from happening. And this book is just like this beautiful time capsule love story of that area. So I loved it for that reason. Again, I did lose interest towards the end of it just because it's not my usual genre. So trying to keep me focused on just somebody wandering around collecting cans is a bit of a challenge for me personally when I'm more of a high action fantasy person. But this was still a beautiful book. It was also, lots of it was written in poetry as well, and like the way that the text was like laid out on the page was really interesting as well. So I do recommend going for the physical book for this one if you're able to. I think that you would get a lot more out of it from the physical book for it. This was a great book, and if I kept my interest for the entire time, it would have been like a 4 or a 4.5, but just because I did lose interest towards the end, I gave it a 3.5 star. Then I read The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. This is her memoir. This was really interesting. It's kind of hard to like rate and review a memoir, but yeah, it was really interesting. I had no idea what her life was like. I've never been like a huge Britney fan. I've become more of a fan of her after like things have started coming out about her life, and I wanted to show support to her. So I have learned a little bit about her throughout the years, but not a whole lot. But yeah, I really had no idea like what she went through throughout most of her career, and it was heartbreaking to find out. Like, she has been through so much. She is such a strong person, and it was very interesting to hear things in her words about what her life was like. Definitely recommend it if you are a fan of memoirs or of Britney herself, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read kind of a dud for me, so I read The Sacrifice by Rin Chupeco. This is my 3rd book from this author, the second one that I've actually finished, and me and this author just, we don't vibe. I think it's time for me to stop reading from this author. I don't know why I keep trying. I think I just like her ideas, but I don't like her writing like at all. But this one is I think it's a YA horror, might be like older YA, I'm not really sure, but it's about this boy. He's 18 years old. He lives on this island in the Philippines that is cursed, and the book starts with him agreeing to be the tour guide for a TV show crew, and they're planning on making a show about the island's curse, and I'm sure you can imagine things don't go well. So I loved the concept, and I really enjoyed the like naturey tree magic. It was grotesque and like beautifully written in that case. I loved how the magic was written. It was just everything else about it I really didn't like. The characters were kind of one note to me. I didn't really like them. The scenes that should have been scary, I just felt like I was being told that they were scary, but they didn't actually feel scary. Like I was not immersed in the story at all. Like not even a little bit. It felt very clinical almost, and just like, I don't know. It wasn't very good. I didn't love it. I gave it a 2.5 stars. I'm not really sure, but it was just like not for me. I think if you like this author, then you would like this book, but I don't like this author, so I didn't. Okay, I have really bad luck with filming wrap-ups and my battery is low, so I'm gonna have to speed through these last couple, and then next wrap-up, I promise I will charge my battery prior to filming. So next up was Girls at the Edge of the World by Laura Brooke Robson. This one is YA sapphic fantasy about royal silk flyers, like people who like do the like acrobats on silks in the air. The end of the world is coming through various storms, and they know that a flood is going to come and like wipe out anyone who's not on these ships. And it's about the main character, who is a silk flyer, trying to make the king fall in love with her to get her and her friends on the ship, and somebody else joins the silk flyer who's actually there to try and kill the king after he killed her former lover, and it's a romance between both of those characters. So they're kind of on opposite sides, but they're also friends because they're both part of the silk flyers, and like it was a very interesting concept, very unique. I loved the idea of it. The execution was kind of mid. It was kind of bland, like nothing really stood out, but it wasn't a bad book by any means, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. I absolutely adored this book. It was so good. This one is a historical romance about a trans woman who was injured in the war and presumed dead, so she took that opportunity to be able to stay dead basically and be able to come out as a woman and live her life as herself. But then years later she finds out that her best friend has never gotten over her, and he's grieving. He's become a very sad recluse person. So she goes to him and things go from there. This was phenomenal. I absolutely adored it. Like, everything about it was... My battery died. God damn it. So I'm just going to finish this on my phone. So I apologize for the very quick switch in quality for the last bit of this video, but I was in the middle of talking about A Lady for a Duke. Yeah, this was such a good book. I really, really liked this one. It was fantastic. I was worried about it after not enjoying Moral Follies by this author a couple months ago. I really didn't like that book at all. So I was a little bit nervous going into this one, but it did not disappoint. I loved it. I loved how everything was handled in terms of her gender expression and like people finding out about it. I thought it was so well done. And this also made me very happy because in terms of the spicier side of this book, this is just like a thing that I've noticed in all media basically. Trans women are often like fetishized but also desexualized in them, like within themselves. They're so heavily fetishized by mostly cis men and chasers, but like it's also this weird misconception that like trans women like are only ever bottoms and only ever and like don't ever want their genitals being touched or looked at or perceived in any way, when like that's not always the case. There are plenty of trans women who not only enjoy things being done to their bit, I'm trying to keep my language less vulgar, but like they also enjoy using what they've got as well too plenty of times, and there's so little media that shows that, and this did not do that. This had our lovely main character as a top and enjoying topping, and I just thought that was such a nice thing to add in there, because it's just like taking away that notion that like having a dick means that you're a man and using your dick is a masculine thing. And it isn't. There are a lot of women who have penises, and using it does not make them less of a woman. Just like a cis woman wearing a strap-on does not make her less of a woman either. I was very happy to see that in this book. Just the conversations that they had surrounding sex were just wonderful. I really enjoyed that part of it. Yeah, just overall, this was such a fantastic book. I loved how transness was shown in this book, and the idea of family and the vulnerability of it, and how difficult it is to tell people that you love, and even if you know that they would support you, it's still so scary to tell them, and it would just be easier to run away and reinvent yourself and never tell them who you really are, because that possibility that they might not love you is always there, no matter who they are, no matter how secure that you feel with them, there's always that chance, and that's fucking terrifying. And I loved how this book showed that. That, as well as the portrayal of PTSD. Both of these characters were in the war, and that's a very prevalent part of their personalities, is the PTSD that comes with that. So yeah, just overall, like, this was such a good book. I gave it 4 stars originally, but I think I might bump it up to at least a 4.5, maybe a 5. Like, just the more that I talk about it, the more that I'm loving it. So we're gonna say 4.5, but it might end up being a 5 down the road. Second from last, I read The Fae Keeper by A.G. Edgmon. This is the sequel to The Witch King, and I loved this. It was so good. It's an urban YA fantasy about a trans boy who was born in fairy, but he's a witch. Witches who are born to fairy parents are considered to be abominations. They're often abandoned as infants. They're treated horribly. And so when Wyatt is a teenager, he actually runs away after a horrible accident happens. And the book starts when his fiance, who is the crown prince of Fairy, comes to find him because he still wants to get married, because he needs to take the throne before his evil cousin takes it from him. So that's where book 1 starts, and book 1 was fantastic. Book 2 was just as good. It picks up right where it leaves off from book 1, and it is messy and full of very messy queer characters, which I love. I love a good messy queer book. I love this one. It was a fantastic sequel. I don't know if there's going to be more in this series. Like, this book ended where, like, it could just be a duology, but it also, there is definitely room for it to be a trilogy, so I wouldn't be mad about that if it was. But as is, I am very happy with how this series ended. I loved it, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book that I read was A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. I love T. Kingfisher. She's one of my favorite authors of all time, and I love pretty much everything that she writes at this point in time. I'm very rarely let down by her. This one is a dark fairy tale retelling of The Goose Girl, about this 14-year-old girl whose mother is a sorceress, and she's very much evil. Very evil. Horrible person. She's abusing her. She murders whenever it suits her fancy. And her mother has her eyes set on this rich man who she's trying to marry and get her daughter to marry off to a different rich man as well too. This was a fantastic book. I thought it was so well done. I love fairy tale horror. I think it's such a great genre, and this was such a good example of one of them. I loved it. Am I surprised? No. It's T. Kingfisher. Of course it's gonna be good. But yeah, I love the main character. I love the friendships that she forms. I loved Hester, the ant character, I think was my favorite character. And yeah, just like everything about it was phenomenal. It wasn't as creepy as I would have liked it to be. I would have liked to have a little bit more like haunting eeriness to it, which I know T. Kingfisher can definitely do, so I was hoping for a bit more of that, but it did still have the classic T. Kingfisher humor to it as well too. And yeah, this was fantastic, and I gave it a 4 star. So yeah, that is everything for the month of August. Let me know what your favorite book of last month was, or if you read any of the ones that I did, let me know as well, and we can chat about them. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys later on. Bye!